You are listening to the Libertarian Express Radio Network.
Welcome, everyone, to the inaugural episode of the Libertarian Express Radio Network. I'm your narrator and host, Robert Rowe. Today on LERN, I want to begin my exploration of the origins of the Constitution and how it came about. Now, in order to understand the Constitution, one must first understand where the Constitution came from. It's not simply a document which a group of radicals dreamt up over the course of several months. No, the Constitution of the United States of America is a document several thousand years in the making. It is by no means a perfect document, but it is the most perfect political document ever yet written. In time, there will be another which will supersede it in terms of global political importance, but for the last 2¼ centuries it has served as the most profoundly important document ever presented to the people of the world with regard to governance and personal individual freedom and responsibility. Over the next several episodes, I'm going to take a look at the evolution of legal precedents and political theory which resulted in the Constitution. However, in order to do this, the listener must understand the necessity to jump around through history, as the evolution of this document can be said to have begun thousands of years ago with Greek and Roman political thinkers and philosophers. Now, many will believe that when I refer to the Greeks, that I am referring to their concept of democracy. In fact, this is not true. While the concept of democracy is a great gift given to the world by the Greeks, that concept really doesn't have a whole lot to do with the Constitution. No, the concepts from the Romans and the Greeks to which I refer are the concepts of the public versus the people, and we'll get more into that later. Now, when we think of preceding documents which influenced the drafters of the Constitution, most think of the Magna Carta. While there can be little doubt that this document certainly had some influence on the Constitution, what most people don't realize is that more modern documents of the era had greater influence on the framers of the Constitution than the Magna Carta. Many will also mistakenly believe that the works of Locke and the Whigs may have exerted a great amount of influence on the Constitution, and again, maybe there was a small degree of influence there, but the truth is, the works of Locke were, while not outright rejected by the colonists, they were considered to be more of crown propaganda than anything else. However, in order to understand how the Constitution came to be, we must first understand how the people of the 1700s thought and what political philosophy guided them. In today's episode, I'm going to discuss the previously mentioned concept of the public versus the people. It's very important that this concept be understood completely by anyone who is undertaking to understand the origins of constitutional thinking by the Founding Fathers. Now, have you ever wondered why the United States Constitution begins with the three words, "We the people"? Why didn't the Founding Fathers begin the Constitution with another phrase, such as, the American public, or the citizens of America, or some other such statement? What's the difference between the public and the people? This can be very confusing to most in today's terms, as we all too often misuse both those terms and improperly interchange them in political conversations and communications. I mean, after all, don't the people make up the public? Isn't the public consisting of the people? Well, the answer to both of those questions is yes, but not for the reasons that you might think. So let's consider the opening words of the Constitution. It reads, "We the people." It does not read, "We the public." So one must ask then, why is this the case? The answer to that is that the terms did not mean the same things to the founders. In fact, to them, the two terms were only related, but seldom interchanged. Speech in those days was considered and deliberate, whereas today we're very lazy with our speech and we'll use any word that even comes close to meaning what we're trying to represent. Now, in any governing system which uses a constitution to codify governmental institutions and responsibilities, that constitution must identify those who are eligible to rule, those who are eligible to select those who will rule, and those who must be the servants of those who rule. In the case of the Constitution of the United States of America, the people are those who rule. The people are those who select their representatives, and the governing bodies are the servants of the people. Notice I did not use the word public to describe any of those groups. Our Constitution provides for a distinctly new type of democratic governance. It combines two moderately successful governing concepts, but in combining these two concepts, we created an entirely new one that has proven to be extremely successful. Now, the first of these concepts is, of course, democracy. Prior to our Constitution, the populace in some countries may have been allowed to select their rulers, but they were never considered to be those who ruled. Now let's refer to the Greeks again. They developed the form of governance which allowed the population to select those who would rule over them. This was called democracy. When this form of governance was first developed, eligible Greek citizens were allowed to select the ruling class. Now take note of what I just said. They selected those who would rule over them. Yes, the senators were supposed to represent the people and their wishes, but those senators were not considered to be representatives. They were considered by the citizenry to be the ruling class. Now in America, we use the democratic process as part of our governing system, but we use this process to select our representatives. We select people to represent us locally, as in the case of our city councils, state governors, what have you. We also select people to represent us nationally, like our federal representatives and our federal senators. And we also select people who represent us to the rest of the world, like our president and vice president. But in each case, the individuals selected are tasked with representing the wishes of those who elected them. They are not tasked with ruling over those who elected them. Now this is a very important distinction to make. In a democracy, the population selects their rulers. In the American system, we use the democratic process to select a person to serve the needs of Americans. For this reason, the United States is not and cannot be considered a democracy. We also use a form of republicanism. Now, in a republic, the land, the country, the political systems, the resources, everything belongs to the public. I did not say the people. Notice that I said the public. Why did I use that term? Because the public consists of every citizen who resides in the United States. Now, an argument can also be made that those who are here illegally are part of the public, and be that as it may, that's a debate for another time. For purposes of this episode, it really does not matter whether illegals are part of the public or not. So our system of governance recognizes that there is a public, and it recognizes that the public owns the country and everything in it. But the concept of a republic is flawed. If every person in the republic owns every part of the country, then who is the ruling class? Unfortunately, this form of governance seems to tend to eventually devolve into a state of chaotic anarchy. While many anarchists will take exception to this characterization, as they believe anarchy to be a civilized state of existence, anarchy has historically always rapidly developed into a chaotic and entropic experience. In theory, anarchy sounds nice, but in practice, it doesn't seem to ever work out well on a macroscopic scale. So what our founding fathers did was develop a completely unique system of governance, combining the best from democracy and republicanism. What this means is that the United States is a constitutionally mandated democratic republic. We could very easily be called the Democratic Republic of the United States of America. Okay? We use the rule of law as defined in the Constitution to define the political structure of our republic. That Constitution clearly defines when and how the democratic process is to be used. It defines a ruling class, and it requires that the right of participating in the democratic process be vested to the ruling class only. And it defines the servant class, which, ironically, can only be chosen from members of the ruling class. Because the United States is part republic, everyone who is a citizen of the country is part owner of the country. And this means that every citizen is responsible for maintaining and caring for the country. But the Constitution does not define the public as the ruling class, even though they are the rightful owners of the country. The ruling class of the United States is only those eligible to participate in the democratic process. Those who are allowed to select the representatives of our citizenry are referred to as the people. Now here we have to remember that the founders made a clear distinction between those who were public, everyone, and those who were the people, the ruling class. All members of the people are part of the public, but not all members of the public are part of the people. Only those who meet certain requirements are considered to be the people. They are the subgroup of the public who are the ruling class and who select those who will represent the wishes of the people and from which the representatives are selected. Now notice what I just said there. They select who will represent the wishes of the people, the ruling class, not the wishes of the public. Those who are elected to office are there to represent the wishes of the ruling class, not the wishes of those who are not eligible to be part of the ruling class. Now, all you parents out there, I want you to remind your children of this every time they try to tell you that they live in a democracy or they live in a republic or a democratic republic or whatever the popular thing of the day is. Okay, remind them they are not considered people because they do not meet the requirements to be so. So in short, the American public consists of all citizens residing in the United States of America and all of its territories and holdings. The people of the subgroup of the public who are constitutionally and otherwise eligible to select representatives on the local and state and national level are the people. Now, here's where it starts to become interesting. There is very little in the Constitution to define those who are considered people. Now, we know that the age of majority is set by the Constitution, and we also know that it prohibits using racial and gender discrimination to determine who is eligible to be part of the people. But it stops there. It leaves further clarification of the definition of people up to the several states. And that definition is different for each state. For example, in some states, an incarcerated prisoner is allowed to vote. In some states, incarcerated prisoners are not allowed to vote, but they can vote while they are on parole or probation. In some states, an ex-felon cannot vote until after being released from parole or probation. And in some states, once you've been convicted of a felony, you can never vote in that state. So, if you are convicted of a felony, say in the state of Oregon, and you remain in that state, you can vote after you're released from prison because that's their law. But if you move from Oregon to the state of Florida, you would lose your right to vote because Florida does not allow felons or ex-felons to vote, because the definition of people differs for the state of Florida than it does from the state of Oregon. The point here is that each state defines for themselves who is people and who is public. Now, there are other restrictions to determine who is considered people, to be sure, but I use the felon example because it's one that we all understand. But the framers of the Constitution realized that the definition of the term people would vary greatly amongst various populations within the country. Therefore, they left the real power of determining who is people and who isn't up to each state. Now, this serves the purpose of limiting the federal government's power to determine who can rule and maximizing the power of the individual states, ensuring their supremacy over the federal government. Now, there are certain things that people can do that the public cannot. For instance, only people can enter into legally binding contracts and create legal entities such as corporations. The public cannot do these things. People can vote, but the public cannot. People are eligible to be selected as representatives. The public is not. There are other examples, but we'll stop here. Now, this signifies that it is only the ruling class, the people, to whom the document called the Constitution of the United States of America applies. It does not grant those rights to everyone residing in the country. It only guarantees those rights to people. People, as defined by the Constitution, and further meeting the requirements of the state of residency. Therefore, those members of our country who are public are not guaranteed the rights and protections of our Constitution. Again, think minors. Think foreigners. They are not guaranteed those rights. Now, traditionally, we afford the public those rights and protections, but it should be noted that there is no requirement that we do so. To illustrate this further, let's assume that two men are charged with a crime and arrested. Now, let's say they're both charged with the same crime. Okay? Now, one of these is an American citizen and meets all the requirements of being considered people. The other is a foreigner, say from Canada, who is residing in the United States legally, and this makes him a member of the public, but not a member of the people. Now, the citizen, who is a member of the people, must be informed of his Miranda rights. He cannot be compelled to testify against himself. He is protected from unlawful searches and seizures of his personal effects, and he's entitled to all the other protections and rights associated with due process and jury trials. The foreigner is not guaranteed any of these rights and protections. The foreigner can, theoretically, be held indefinitely without any due process or protections or rights. They can torture this man, they can withhold food and water, they can deny medical treatment, and they can do just about anything they wish because he has no rights under our Constitution, because he is not a member of the ruling class. Constitutional rights do not apply to those who do not belong to the ruling class. If you're not a member of the people, you don't have rights. Fortunately for members of the public, we in America are generous, and by tradition we afford them the same rights, or most of the same rights, while they are on American soil. Now, we're not required to do so by any means, but because we are a civilized nation and because we set the standard of freedom for the world, we graciously allow the public most of the rights and protections that the Constitution guarantees the people. Now, here's my opinion for the one or two of you who may care. The Constitution does a satisfactory job of defining which members of our country are members of the ruling class and which aren't. And it is important that the Constitution not be diluted or violated in this matter. It takes a constitutional amendment to override or change the definition of the people. However, with the current political climate in this country, most Americans seem content to allow the federal government to propose and pass laws which circumvent the Constitution to acquire more power. For the last 2¼ centuries, this definition of people has worked out quite well for us. But I foresee a time in the future where this will change. I can see a popular movement on the horizon which will allow the government to determine who is people and who is not. And this cannot be allowed to happen. The people of this country are the rightful rulers, and only the people should be allowed to determine what the definition of people should be. Once we allow the federal government to determine who makes up the ruling class, they will immediately work to disallow the rights and protections of the Constitution to all but a few elite people. Now, I made a statement earlier which is going to piss off a lot of people. I said the rights as defined and outlined in the Constitution are only granted to the people and not to the public. And this is why the Constitution begins with the three famous words, "We the people." The people, as defined by the Constitution and the several states, are the rightful rulers and only rulers of this country. But just because the people are the ruling class does not give them license to abuse those who are not members of the people. Now, most of you will recognize immediately that I am making a reference to those who are being held in Guantanamo Bay. They are not considered people by our Constitution because they are not a member of our ruling class. They don't meet the requirements. But that does not give us the right to torture them. That does not give us the right to treat them inhumanely. Traditionally, we offer those same protections to others who do not meet the requirement of being people, who meet only the requirements of being public. But for whatever reason, our government has decided that it has the right to strip away human dignities from people who do not meet those requirements. There is a reason that we the people afford the public many of the same rights and protections that are guaranteed us. And that reason is simply that the ruling class in any country only rules at the pleasure of those over whom they rule. Now, in the case of the United States, we must remember that though the people are the masters, the public are the owners. So, let's consider it like this. Let's consider the United States a corporation. Okay? The public are the shareholders. They own all the stock of the corporation. The people are like the board of directors, and the government is like the chairman of the board. The owners hold all the stock, and the board of directors run the company, and they must keep the owners happy by providing profit. The chairman of the board is selected from the board of directors by the board of directors. The chairman's job is to ensure that the wishes of the board are carried out, thus ensuring the profitability of the corporation. If the board of directors is not satisfied with the job that the chairman is doing, it is their responsibility to replace him. If the board fails to do this and it results in unhappy shareholders, this corporation then becomes vulnerable to hostile takeover. And that is where the United States of America stands right now. We are vulnerable to hostile takeover. Now, there are several methods available to Americans to remedy this weakened state. The problem is that the board of directors has become so divided on how to run the country, meaningful and respectful debate can no longer be had on the subject. We've come to the point where we must decide as a nation whether we want to continue down the path of authoritarianism and the nanny state, or if we want to return to the freedom of libertarianism. There is no other choice. All other options represented to us are an illusion. They are a Hobson's choice. The illusion of choice where there really is no choice. We've come to the point where the very terms we use to identify the two main factions are no longer accurate, and they all mean the same thing. We have the Republicans who claim to be conservatives. We have the Democrats who claim to be liberals. The truth is, neither side is conservative nor liberal. They're both authoritarian. They're both fascist. And they are both a Hobson's choice. There is only one decision to be made at this point. Only one choice. Do we abandon freedom and continue on towards our Orwellian nightmare, or do we accept responsibility for our country and ourselves and return to a free society? Thank you for listening to the Libertarian Express Radio Network. LERN is dedicated to free expressions of any idea which enhances the freedom of the world's population. Libertarian Express Radio Network endorses the Libertarian Party but is not affiliated with it in any way. The views expressed on this program are solely those of LERN. I'm Robert Rowe, and as usual, I hope you have a great day.